This is We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling, where I give you the tools and skills you need to love better so you can live better. When people come out, that thing that people in the LGBTQ community do to tell their friends and family that we've discovered we're not straight, that process is usually not like one single conversation and then like, boom, we're out of the closet, we've broken free. Most experiences are more like a series of discussions, like a chapter of disclosures followed by moments of quite intense apprehension where we are basically holding our breath, awaiting the response. Even as I began outlining this episode, it struck me that coming out is literally about declaring that your sexual orientation is not the default, the one we're raised to be. I didn't always know I was gay, but I definitely always knew I was different. I was never really jealous or envious of beautiful women the way some women were, actually the way most women were when I was growing up. But I also can't say that I was consciously attracted to women, at least not until like my early 20s, which makes sense. I went to high school in the 80s in a suburb in northern New Jersey. Most of our families had moved from Newark. We were part of the 1960s white flight into suburbia. And my high school could be a violent place, particularly for kids who were different. I was Jewish in a sea of Italian Catholics, and I had deeply underdeveloped social skills. And I got a lot of attention for the way I looked, which made me a magnet for trouble. And that's probably why I never contemplated my sexual orientation as a teenager. I like to say that I had enough trouble just being a Jew in the 80s. But college, that was a different world. Kids came from other towns, other states. They thought differently. They behaved differently. They questioned norms differently from the way I did. And that made me feel like I could too, which is how I found myself kissing a girl for the first time in my junior year. But the influence of my upbringing, that was a hard chain to break. Or maybe I was just hell-bent on getting married and settled, making my own way. And in my head, that didn't have anything to do with women. So I married my college boyfriend, and we had a good run, all in more than 13 years. And when that relationship ended, I was pretty sure I wasn't going to date men anymore. I guess I should probably back up for a second. I realized I was at least bisexual during my marriage, in part because the last 2 years of that relationship, we were polyamorous. So the first part of my coming out was to come out to my family that I was dating women with consent from my spouse in a heterosexual marriage. And then 2 years later, when my marriage was over, I just wanted to date women. Coming out, the age at which you determine that you're not straight and then you take the leap to tell your tribe, that is a process that is heavily influenced by the era that you grow up in, the zeitgeist, and the security of the relationships that you have in your life. My coming out was made exponentially smoother because of when I came out. It was the early 2000s during the original airing of Showtime's The L Word, which may sound insignificant, but it is really hard to imagine a future that you have never seen portrayed in media. The L Word featured lesbian characters who were more diverse than I had ever seen. For some of them, being gay wasn't the entirety of their identity, it was just a part. They didn't all play sports. Some of the characters were making real money, and many were traditionally feminine-looking women, which was something that even today can unnecessarily complicate a feminine-presenting woman's coming out journey because the stereotype of a lesbian is still not feminine-presenting. I've actually never talked about my coming out before. For no reason other than I've never been asked. But this week, a different niece of mine, not Ashton, texted me and said that her friends would really like an episode on coming out. So this one is for her. Here to help me with all the questions and who will probably be hearing much of this for the first time in her life is the niece you've come to know and love, Ashton Tardif. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I've been absent from the past few episodes because I recently started a new job, which, starting a new job after 3 years at an old company is a huge transition. So I've really been focusing my efforts on getting acclimated and figuring things out. And it's a really exciting new beginning because I clearly haven't had enough of those this year or the
It is a
past.
year of new chapters for you, for sure.
Literally, everything in my life has changed the past 7 months, but all for the better. But I'm very happy to be back. And I hope everyone missed me as much as you did.
I definitely missed the heck out of you. And I heard from people that they missed you, which I really loved. I really loved hearing that. A handful of people who don't even know you, who were like, I really missed the niece. Is she coming back? And I was like, she's coming back.
Oh my God, that just gave me levels of serotonin that I don't think any antidepressant could.
You say, Lord.
So, enough about me. Obviously, this episode is about coming out, and a lot of my questions are going to start from ground zero. So, I've always just thought of you, Darcy, as my aunt, and not so much as a gay person, even though obviously I've known you were gay. I actually remember the first time that I believe it was my dad or my mom, they told me, I think I was very young, like 9 or 10, that you were gay. And I just remember being confused, maybe because I had never met a gay person to my knowledge. Also, I was in Catholic school, which is not something that was talked about or at that point, even encouraged in any capacity. And a lot of
you
people
were down south. You grew up in Charlotte,
yes,
North Carolina.
So you can imagine my experiences with the LGBTQIA plus community had been severely minimal. You were really my only contact to that community. And I remember navigating adolescence and as I got older, when I would share with my friends that you were gay, so many of them were shocked or surprised. And their comments were like, really? She looks so straight. She's so feminine. They were just so like shocked. And I think that really speaks to the narrative around being gay, especially down south. Not so much anymore, but definitely for a long time there. So, how was that like for you as a femme when you came out?
Lonely. It was really lonely. As I said in my intro, had I not come out during a period of time where this groundbreaking show, The L Word, came out, and it just shook the tactile plates in the LGBTQ community in the most positive way, because it really just created a path forward for me to even see a possibility of what life could look like as a gay woman, as a woman who was going to be with women, regardless of where I ultimately decided that I landed on the spectrum, because my coming out was a whole process. And we'll get to that in a minute. But I remember the first time I went to a gay bar. I was in PhD school. I went with a friend of mine who was also in school with me. She had grown up in New York City. And we went to a bar, Henrietta Hudson's, infamous landmark lesbian bar in the West Village. And
was she lesbian too?
No, she was straight.
Okay.
She was straight. And I was exploring my sexual orientation. And she was like, sure, I'll go with you. And I figured, a New York friend, she like grew up in New York. She's exposed to diversity. And when she and I walked into that bar, I can tell you, and this is no shade on Henrietta's, this speaks more to the time. I guess it had to be 2003. We walk into Henrietta Hudson's, and when I tell you, I had never felt more objectified in a straight club by men than I did walking into that place. We each got a drink. We had about 2 sips of it. And she turned to me and said, I think I need to leave. I'm feeling really uncomfortable. And I'm telling you, it was, people will weigh in and they'll be like, oh my God, it was so homophobic. Maybe. I don't think she was homophobic. I think that she felt like her clothing was being peeled off with her eyes. That's what I think, because that's how I felt. We were two feminine women in a lesbian bar. And at the time, we were the only people with hair longer than our shoulders and with makeup on. And again, no shade on, well, I love Henriette Hudson's. It's a very different place today. But when I came out, there was nobody who looked like me that I had seen other than on television through that one show. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to find a home in the gay community. That was my very first experience in a gay bar. Well, as somebody who was exploring her own sexual orientation, I'd been to dozens of gay bars, some of which were with your mom back in the day. And but exploring myself, that was my first experience. And it was like that for a very, very long time, where every time I met someone, even still today, I am constantly having to re-come out every time I meet someone because they're confused, because I'm straight presenting, because I like makeup and hair, and I like being feminine, and I like presenting the way I present. My experience at that time, there weren't many other people like me. There were plenty of straight people who identified as straight or bi-curious and had no desire to live a gay life who looked like me. But I did not experience too many people who were like me for a very, very, very long time. I got lucky early on in that I made friends with an owner of a lesbian magazine who was a very good friend of mine. You met her over the years, like when you were a teenager coming to live with us in the summers. I don't know if you remember her, but I used to write a column for her magazine, and that exposed me to a whole world that I would not otherwise have been exposed to. And there I met other women who were not necessarily on the binary end of the spectrum. They weren't butch presenting, they weren't dyke presenting. There was a whole spectrum of presentations. And that was really, really comforting. And it's only progressed more since then.
Absolutely. And I think the key word here is spectrum, because I do think that for a very long time, being gay was like you either presented gay or people didn't register. So you've had your platform and your blog, Ask Dr. Darcy, I think since the year you got married, which
I think so too.
I mean, you would know better than me. I don't even think I had an email address at the time, or a phone. But have you always been out publicly, I guess, on those platforms?
From the time I was dating Steph, I've been out. And I made that decision to publicly be out from the beginning of my blog, Ask Dr. Darcy, in part because I felt like there weren't enough people who looked like me representing more feminine presenting women. And I thought it was really important. Not to mention, I think there were 3 gay celebrities at the time. I'm going to offend people if I start going through it. Maybe there were 5 that were out. There was Ellen, there was Rosie, there was Wanda Sykes, there was a female comedian who was out, another female comedian, not Wanda. But there were basically like 5 or 6 lesbians out that were role models. And I really felt that I didn't know if my platform was going to grow, but I felt that it behooved me to be an example and try and clear a little bit more of a path for people. So I remember speaking to Steph about it. She wasn't openly out. I mean, Steph is the walking poster child for gay, right? Because Steph has literally been my passport into the gay world, because you see Steph and you assume that she's gay because she identifies as a dyke.
Female Brad Pitt is kind of what I think when I see her, which you're welcome, Steph. I know you love that.
Literally going to flatter the shit out of her. The female Brad Pitt. But so Steph, people see her, they get her right away. And to a certain extent, she's been my passport. But I remember sitting down and saying to her, I really feel strongly like I need to be out. And she was like, you do you. You do what you have to do. I'm in a relationship with you. Steph likes to say that she turns straight spaces gay. She's like, I don't need to be in a gay space to be comfortable. Everywhere I go becomes gay. Maybe that's because of the way she presents, Or maybe that's because she's always known she was gay.
Yeah.
I didn't always know I was gay, so I
Mm.
really needed a gay experience coming out. And I think coming out publicly, it opened doors. I was invited to lots of events when I was just a little bit older than you coming out. And the world was, it was an exciting world. The world was is a bit of my oyster. I had a great time in those early years.
Wait, so you were around my age when
A
you...
little bit older than you.
Okay.
I was in my early to mid 30s, which I realize probably feels like light years older than you are right now. But looking backwards,
It's not.
It's 4 or 5
It's
years older
fine.
than you.
It's fine. It's not. Well, that's a whole nother episode, aging and what that feels like for women. So what was the process like in figuring out that you were gay? Because for those who don't know, you historically had been dating men and you had even been married to a man.
So from the time I came out publicly, I came out as not straight. I did not come out as anything other than that because I thought I was going to land on certainty. So I threw myself into psychoanalysis because I thought a great shrink will help me figure this shit out. And that's where I was 4 times a week for about a year and a half. And that exhausting experience wore me out to the point where, like, after a year and a half, I was just like, you know what? I don't land in a binary category. And ultimately, what I decided is I walk the planet more easily with women, with woman, with Steph. And I was always pretty clear that I didn't land at the end of the gay spectrum the way Steph does. She grew up, she always knew she was gay. And in many ways, that looked appealing to me. I was hoping to land there. Where I wound up landing is deciding, look, I'm in love with this woman. She was not the first person I had dated. I had dated other women before. And we were already best friends. So we knew that we had the friendship piece locked. And I knew that we were going to be in a committed relationship for the foreseeable future. And so I decided to identify as being lesbian, but that doesn't mean that I definitively landed on one end of the spectrum. I'm somewhere in the middle, but I'm not choosing to date in the middle. I'm married. That's how I identify. I am married. That's my identification. And, you know, my experiences with men, they have always been great. Yeah, I've had great relationships with guys. They've always been very loving, very generous. I didn't walk away from those experiences feeling repulsed. I didn't so much as walk away from men as I walked towards women, my attraction to women.
And when you phrase it like that, it's kind of a miracle that I'm not gay, because I at times are like, I need to walk away from men, but just to be by myself, because my experiences have not all been loving and wonderful. And I remember, oh, you'll probably want to edit this out, you telling me the biggest disappointment that you've brought me, Ashton, is the fact that you're not gay or interested in women. And I just remember thinking, you know what? I really wish I was. I wish I was, if not just to, you know, broaden my dating pool besides the straight males that are currently available.
I definitely remember saying that. And I am going to say, for the record, we are wise asses in the family. And
I knew you didn't mean it. Like, truly mean it. I was like, oh, God, I better be
I
gay.
still repeat that. I literally still repeat that story to people. I'm like, she's amazing. If only she weren't so vehemently straight, but it is what it is. It is what it is. We love you. We accept you.
I thought about it. I tried. So why is coming out important?
Well, it's important for different people for different reasons. For me, my most conscious reasoning was that I felt like we needed more representation as women. But on a personal level, I mean, you know this, Ashton. I'm not going to derail today's topic with this, but I come from a generation of our family, in our family, where secrets were imposed on us. And I was not going to co-sign on more secrets. I did not want my sexual orientation to be yet another big brick in my backpack of baggage of secrets that were imposed on me by our parents. And I think that there's an element of that that's probably relatable because hiding a part of your identity, it really sucks. It takes up enormous space in your brain. It's difficult to relax. You're always having to be mindful of who you're speaking to. What do they know about you? It's exhausting, and it's, quite frankly, it's pretty miserable. And there's an expression, you're only as sick as your secrets. And dude, I was fucking done with secrets. By the time I realized I was going to be dating women, I was not going to hide that.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, I
but I
can
think
only
everybody's
imagine.
got their own reasons. And I think most of them have to do with like the burden of hiding yourself. Can you imagine being in love with someone and not telling everyone you loved about that person? You remember the feeling you get when you're first dating and crushing and you're like dying to tell everyone
Mhm.
you're having to control the impulse to broadcast how exciting it is because you don't want to get your hopes up because you
Yeah.
don't want, you don't know if it's going to work out. Well, imagine not feeling like you can tell people about that because the person that you're into is of a sexual or is of a sex that people would not support a relationship with.
Yeah, and like you also might not feel as safe because at the time, I mean, there still is, there's tons of crime and violence against the gay communities. And I can't even imagine that. I remember the crush feeling, but I've never had a crush or a desire or a relationship with somebody and feel scared that society was going to judge me or potentially cause me harm because of it.
I mean, and I don't want to minimize that, but the innate desire to be accepted by our tribe, Ashton, I cannot underscore how hardwired we are to want our family to accept us
Mhm.
and to want our loved ones to support us. At the time that I came out, I was living 10 miles from New York City, and still I felt that the boundary of not being in New York City was going to create a roadblock to the level of acceptance that I would experience. And I remember straight family members saying to me, Darcy, it's a different world. You don't have to move to the city. You can be gay here. Like, it's such a tolerant world. And I was like, I don't want to be fucking tolerated. I don't want to be
Mm.
tolerated. I want to be loved. I want to be wanted. I am not interested in tolerance. And that's how I felt. So it was a combination of reasons.
Mhm. So how do you guide clients on the process of coming out?
So I have to start by saying that there's no right and wrong way of doing it, but there's
Oh,
definitely a Darcy way of doing it. 'Cause
as is most
some,
things.
'cause I'm a fucking control freak. Obviously, you know me well enough to know I like clients to be prepared. I don't like an impulsive disclosure of any type that makes me nervous for them.
Mm.
So I like my clients first to be pretty certain of where they are on the spectrum or that they're comfortable of being in an ambiguous place on the spectrum like I was, because you're going to then get peppered with a lot of questions. Recall that coming out is literally just about telling your loved ones that you're not straight. So I like a client first to know where they are and be pretty certain about that. And then I like them to imagine what are the best possible responses? What are some of the scariest responses? I like us to workshop that stuff so that I can help guide them on grounding techniques and things to do in the moment, no matter what the response is.
Mhm.
I also like people to contemplate, you know, could they lose emotional support? Could they lose financial support? Where are they in their life and in their level of independence? Can they withstand the possibility that they could lose one or both of those things? Could coming out put you in danger?
Mhm.
One of the parts of my profession and being in my profession now and in the last 15, 18 years in particular that I've loved is how technology has like broken through all the boundaries. I've been working with people globally, in various capacities for close to 20 years. I've had clients in Middle Eastern countries where it was not okay for them to be gay,
Mhm.
but they were able to reach out to me back then on Skype because
Mhm.
I was
Throwback.
available. And they literally didn't have to deal with having to find a local therapist to talk through with this stuff. And one of the things that we spoke about, particularly to two or three of those individuals that I worked with, was, could coming out put you in danger with your family? And even if not with your family, then with your community. I like people to be prepared for the onslaught of questions that will also come. So when you come out, it's not just a monologue. You're going to disclose this thing in a and you're going to squirm. And then after you get the first response, which we're all hoping for acceptance and love, there will be questions. And you have to be prepared for those questions, which it doesn't mean that you have to have the answers to those questions. It's not your job to be the expert on all things gay, but it is helpful if you can be patient and tolerant, because loved ones are actually less likely to ask strangers their questions than you. I will tell you that my mother, may she rest in peace, my mother must have asked me the same questions like 5 or 6 times, to the point where I was just like, "Can you just ask Steph?" And Steph was like, "Darcy, I'll just handle this for you." Because, like, it's like my mother's brain was a little bit Teflon, like, information wasn't landing, it wasn't integrating, she couldn't understand. I had been dating Steph. Well, I had been out for like 7 years by the time I got married to Steph, and I had been with her for 4 years by the time we got married. We had been engaged for 2 years. My wedding was planned, it was choreographed, every step of it was choreographed, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Yeah.
My mother knew everything for a solid year before we got married. The week before we got married, she's calling me and asking me if Steph's gonna wear a dress. I'm just like, I don't even know what to do with this anymore. Steph, can you please talk to your future mother-in-law? And by the way, I get it if you want to back out. I get it. I come with a lot. And timing, everything is timing. So just like I would never want you, Ashton, to have a conversation, a serious conversation with a family member or a friend that you really need them to be grounded for and prepared for, you want to make sure that the person that you're coming out to is mentally capable of having that conversation with you. I do not recommend doing it on a holiday or another scheduled family event. You know, we've got like your brother's wedding coming up.
Oh,
Nobody should be
imagine.
coming out at that wedding.
No,
Nobody
no.
should be coming out on that weekend. That's his weekend. Leave it alone. And just and it's that way with holidays also. Like, it's not the time. People
No.
are under stress. So when I say that it's personal and there's no right way or wrong way, I certainly have opinions about everything. And when they're my clients, I am giving them guideposts because I want it to be as smooth as possible. And I think that when people are feeling resilient, they're more likely to give you back what you need.
Mhm.
And resilience, particularly for moms and women, don't tend to happen when they're hosting a holiday. Like,
Right.
that is when we feel stretched and we feel overwhelmed. And that is not a good time to expect us to be in a particularly open headspace to have that conversation.
So, and this next question could be different for everybody. Are there stages to coming out? Because, like, it's kind of like a PSA. I guess on social media, you could like make a post and then just be like, there it is, world. But then other people are probably like, this is going to be a series of different separate conversations with people that are all probably going to look a little different. So, what are these stages, if there even are stages?
So you got to start with figuring yourself out before you can expect other people to understand where you're at. Because if you
Mhm.
don't know how to explain it, even if the answer is, I'm somewhere in the middle, or this is what I'm doing right now, I'm not making declarative statements, you have to be able to say that to people. Or ideally, you're able to say that to people, I think. So, first and foremost, is you have to discover it for yourself. The person has to discover it for themselves. And then you disclose it to others. And then most people want to get connected with the community. They want to make connections in the LGBTQ plus community. And then ideally, there's kind of like an integration of those two worlds, the gay world and, their world that predated them coming out. And it can happen in any order. They're not sequential, but it's a good idea to know what it is you're talking about when you're having a serious conversation so that at least there's just one very confused person in the room.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I know what a not appropriate reaction is to somebody coming out because duh. But what is an appropriate reaction to someone coming out?
They're the same rules that apply to any important conversation. I want you to listen without interrupting. I want you to offer acceptance. Ideally, you got to express gratitude for the fact that the person was just vulnerable and leaned in and like shared something very personal with you. And then ideally, you ask how you can support them through
Mhm.
it. Now, that's a hallmark ideal. Doesn't always go that way. You know, even when you come from a progressive family, it's one thing to support gay rights, it's another thing to have a gay child. Those are
Mhm.
very different things. And people can sometimes be surprised or blindsided by the extent to which what is okay for other people may not be okay for a parent's child to be.
Right.
And there's
Because yeah.
untangling with that. There's, you have to untangle that stuff.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's easy for someone to say they support gay rights, but then when it directly impacts them, meaning that they have to empathize and be present for someone who's gay, it kind of changes for some people in their brain, like their perception of it. Like, oh, now it impacts me. I kind of have to really care, which is so
Right,
fucked up in general.
right.
So, this is a topic that I think has been hotly debated for a very long time. But is there any difference in coming out and also being bisexual versus just gay? And like, what are your thoughts on bisexuality?
Like, is it a layover to
Yeah,
is that like the first step to coming out?
I feel like I've seen a discourse where it's been like, if you're saying you're bisexual, you're just too scared to come out as like fully gay, or you're confused, or you can't be bisexual. You're always going to lean more towards one gender. But doesn't that still fall into the category of bisexuality? Like,
It does. So, sexual orientation for some people is quite fluid,
Mhm.
and bisexuality is a real thing. For some people, it's a layover on the way to disclosing that they're gay,
On the way to gay.
but I don't want to imply that it is a conscious choice to just share that they're bisexual and then eventually they're going to share. I think for a lot of people, your first experience is being gay, hooking up with a same sex person. It's literally like, oh, so I guess I like both. And then it's only with more experience that you discover whether or not you're truly more fluid or if you land on one of the ends of the spectrum. So, in short, bisexuality is a real thing. I think coming out as a bisexual person is complicated because, like me, they don't necessarily fit into a neat box.
Mhm.
Society loves binary categories. So, people supporting someone who comes out as bisexual, they need to be prepared for the fact that that person may vacillate who they date,
Mhm.
depending, because lots of people will date an individual first. And then,
Mhm.
irrespective of their assigned sex at birth. And what we, as the people supporting the bisexual person, need to bear in mind is that it's not about us, it's about them. And we need to be tolerant. How do you like the fact that I just used the word fucking tolerant? So that is how ingrained heterosexuality is in our society. I just embodied it,
Mhm.
not tolerant. We need to be able to tolerate our discomfort with the fact that somebody else is not landing in a category that may feel comfortable for us.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's a big piece of it. And people who identify as bisexual can often feel so overlooked by all the communities. They're not straight enough, they're not gay enough, maybe they pass. And so they're always having to come out as gay or as bisexual, rather, or however they identify their sexual orientation. But oftentimes, bisexual people can feel like they don't belong anywhere. And that really sucks. And so it's really important for people to be mindful that when somebody comes out as gay, let's say a girl, a woman comes out as gay, continues to date men, it doesn't mean that she's straight. If she hasn't corrected your understanding of her label, then she's still bisexual. Doesn't mean she's straight just because she's dating a guy.
And speaking of tolerance, I just want to like give grace to the bisexual men out there, because I do feel like in society, when a woman comes out as bisexual, it's a little bit of I don't want to say easier, because it's not what I can't relate to it, but I feel like what I've seen in media and just online, like for women, it's more readily accepted if they're bisexual versus a man. And I think that really just goes back in time to like deeply ingrained gender roles and archetypes and all of that. But I think it's deeply unfair that men are almost unable to express being bisexual. That sounds kind of fancy. Bisexual.
It does.
Bisexual, and it immediately turns off most hetero women, versus if a bisexual woman is sharing with a hetero man that she's bisexual, for most of them, they're like, oh yeah, that's great. Like, awesome. Not a problem with me. And I really hate that. I hate that for bisexual men who probably feel like they have to keep it a secret.
What I will say to that is I work with a lot of baller women, most of whom are straight. And what I will say is I have known many examples where women met a guy on a dating app to learn that the guy has had same-sex relationships and experiences. And like there's a glimmer in these women's eyes, like, oh, this is somebody who is open-minded. This is somebody who is self-assured. This is somebody who has done some of their own work and they're unapologetic for it. So just want to put that out in the world that there are many women who will hear that. Now, that's not to minimize the point that you made. I think you're absolutely right. I think men are harder on other men for that than women would be.
That too. Yes, absolutely. They have like this ingrained fear that every gay man or bisexual man wants to have sex with them. And let me just tell you, that is not the case. I don't even need to be a man to tell you that. They don't. I mean, they don't.
Yes, it's true. And largely because the standards in the male gay community are so aesthetically perfected that most heterosexuals can't compete, to be perfectly honest. They can't.
Yeah.
Just a different level of perfection out there.
So for the straight men listening to this, stop being afraid of gay men. They don't want to have sex with you. And if they do, they're going to make it pretty apparent. So from what I know. Anyways, did coming out change your relationships with friends and family?
It's so weird that you literally don't know the answers to these questions.
I don't, because I was so young and it never changed my perception or my relationship with you, because you were just my aunt. I was like, okay, well, she's still my aunt. That doesn't change anything.
I know, and you were so little that, like, I guess we never just went backwards. We never went backwards to, like, revisit that. It did not change my relationship with my family. Although I will tell you, my mother, who, you know, the minute I turned 18, she was like, so you'll be voting Democrat. And this is the candidate you will be voting for. I was literally the only person who voted for Dukakis in the fucking world. And I did that at my mother's instruction. When I came out, she was not down. She was not down. In her defense, my mother grew up during the Depression. She was a child of the Depression. And the way I first came out to her was to tell her, I am happily married. I am in a heterosexual relationship with a guy who you think walks on water, is the second coming of God. And that's what everyone thought of him. And I'm dating women within this relationship. And my poor mother's brain matter almost started leaking out of her ears because it was so incomprehensible. It would have been easier for her to hear that I was gay, probably from the beginning, than that.
So why was it so hard for your mom?
because I wasn't coming out as I was in a heterosexual marriage telling her I was dating women within that marriage. That was incomprehensible to her.
Mm.
She had no understanding of that. I think it would have been easier for her to wrap her head around me being gay, but I will tell you, then fast forward to 2 years later when I did come out as gay, the reason I was able to draw from that example that it doesn't matter how progressive the family is that you come from, it's different when your kid is gay than the rights that you support for others. My mother had a harder time with it. In comparison to other people's coming out stories, it was a cakewalk. I will tell you with my friends, it was weird because I was so known as a straight person in this relationship. That relationship was a very long lasting relationship. I was with him 13 years. So with my friends, it was a little weird, but not because of them, because of me. I was so attached to my identity as who I imagined they thought I was that
Mm.
I couldn't see a way of merging my two worlds. And so for a while, I basically walked away from my straight life and I left behind a slew of friends who I imagined wouldn't blend with my new identity. And so getting back to those stages, that fourth stage is like you merge your worlds. And to some extent, I'm kind of still doing that.
And in what way?
In so much as like now that we're living at the beach house, we are reconnecting with friends of mine and mostly of mine. Like Steph's always known she was gay, has always been out in her world, reconnecting with friends of mine that I have not spoken to since my divorce, frankly.
Oh, well, that must be an interesting process to go through because that was a long time ago.
It was a while ago. It was a minute ago. And so the thing is that my friends they didn't act weird. It was me. I was
Mm.
imagining that there would be no blending, or I was imagining like I wouldn't have things in common with them. They were having kids. I was going to magazine parties. You know, it was a different world. And I didn't see a way of blending that. Now that many of their children are grown, and I'm approaching them individual to individual, not like huge tribe to person who's married to one person and has one child who doesn't even live here. It feels much more of a symbiotic experience to me,
Hmm.
and that's just my process.
And everyone's is likely different. Like
Hmm.
it's funny when I actually asked my mom once what her reaction was when you told her that you were gay, and she was like, "Honestly, I think I always knew." And I was like, "Really?" And again, that's a very Kendra thing to say. Sorry, mom, but I just feel like if one of my friends were to come out to me as gay, I feel like I have a list of people where I wouldn't be surprised, and it has absolutely nothing to do with how they present. It's just like I could see that. Good for
Yeah.
you.
And what I'll say is that that is a very common experience for people who come out. Like the family members are like, we were wondering how long it would take you.
That's why I was like, really, none of your friends were like, that checks out.
No, they were not. They were not like that checks
Wow.
out at all.
Wow.
Nobody. People were blown away. They were
Wow.
blown away like your friends have been.
Yeah.
People were very confused. I mean,
Mhm.
today it's not as shocking. Maybe it checks a box and makes me a little bit more interesting. But no, there was not a human being that expected it of me. Um, and I'm gonna have to circle back and ask your mom about that because I did not realize the hardest part for your mom. I mean, if you can you imagine me telling her that I'm married and I'm dating women?
No, no, I can totally see that being similar to
My
your
poor
mother.
sister, my poor sister got on her knees that night. She told me this the next day, and she just prayed to God that I would be okay.
Mm.
She
Yeah, it
was
sounds
so
right.
worried for me.
That sounds right because it wasn't a reality that she could ever wrap her brain around, which for a lot of people back then, yeah, I get it. I get it.
I mean, quite frankly, that part of my story is literally this is a coming out of that of sorts. It's not something that people know about me, that I had a polyamorous
Yeah.
relationship.
I mean, that is a big, well, not a big deal, but it is like a big piece of information for a lot of people to think about,
And
for sure.
imagine your poor mom in 2002. Like that was a very long time
Yeah,
ago. How old were you? Five,
sure.
five, six, seven, something like that? You were very
Under
little.
10.
Yeah,
Under
it was a
10.
lot for her to wrap her head around. I
Yeah.
get it.
We should do an episode about polyamory. Anyways, what?
100%.
Yeah, coming soon. What is the biggest advice that you have for young queer people just entering the world as adults, the dating world as adults? Well, I guess you gotta enter both worlds.
So I can't so much speak to the gay male population because I don't feel like I'm the greatest expert at that. So I'm just going to speak from my own experience and the experience I've had working with lots of women who are in gay relationships. There is something called the lesbian merge. And what that means is it's when two women who have an immediate, intense emotional and physical attraction to each other start immediately spending all their time together.
Oh,
And I would strongly caution women and men against this, against blending your worlds immediately every day of the week. And here's why. Because in a heterosexual relationship, you get a pass for girls' night out and boys' night out. And when you're in a same-sex relationship, you don't get to have time away from your partner. Think about it, Ashton. Anytime we go out, who's with me? Anytime we go out, and we love her, and she is my favorite human being. You know, both of you are differently, which is appropriate. But you know, I want her with me all the time, but I see that becoming a problem so often for people, particularly as they come out of the honeymoon phase and into the second stage of relationship, which is organic love. When you get into that stage, you need a little space from your partner. You're trying to figure out how to be an individual with your own identity and your own world within this relationship. And in order to do that, you need to step away periodically.
yeah.
And if you do this lesbian merge, as so many women do very early on, then you're talking about a somewhat injurious experience for your partner, which doesn't mean it shouldn't happen anyway. Like, we just put on our big girl pants and we suck it up because our partners do need time apart from us, just as we need time apart from them. But I highly suggest people just entering the dating world to make sure that no matter how grand the fireworks are between you and your partner, you carve out at least a night or two a week alone for yourself. If for no other reason, then you want to be able to miss the person. And I promise you, as the months and years roll on, you will want that time away. I promise you. And it's going to be very awkward trying to get that. So it's one of those very big differences. It doesn't seem like a big difference, but it really winds up being such a big difference. You know, even just thinking about the stage that you're in your life, you know, lots of people are getting married. There's bachelorette parties. Well, guess what? I go to a bachelorette party. My wife can come with me. Does that sound fun? I mean, I actually was more annoyed that your brother didn't invite me to his bachelor party. That would have been fucking fun. I will talk to him.
They went golfing. I mean, I wouldn't.
Oh, come on, Ashton.
You're not going to miss that one.
Golfing. Yeah, they went golfing.
With some beers.
Sure. Uh-huh.
I mean, sure. Whatever. I don't want to know.
I'm sure a good time was had by alls.
Yeah. You can come to my bachelorette party in 30 years when I decide find someone to marry.
And guess who will be coming?
You and Steph.
That's right. Because we're both girls. Yep.
Oh, honestly, you both would need to be there regardless. I'm sorry.
But honestly, like, because of our relationship, we would need to both be there. Like, we could never not experience that with you.
I know, I completely agree. It's mandatory. It's mandatory. How
you gonna close us out, kid?
I don't know.
Want to read us out?
On that note, I'll read us out. We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling is a Sterling Standard production. This episode was produced by Darcy Sterling. Editing and sound engineering by Bart McGow. Our theme music is by Trending Music. Special thanks to Amanda Christiani, Preston Smith, and Stephanie Sterling. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing about this topic, please share this episode with them. If you have a question or comment, email us at darcy@askdrdarcy.com. We'll be back on Tuesday with another episode packed with relationship and dating and mental health hacks you've come to expect. References, as always, linked in the show notes.
Thank you, Ashton.
Thank you.